Hey guys, this is Perks, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. I would like you guys to appreciate his YouTube channel, even though he talks sometimes so much shit that not even I can handle it. But most of the time it's pretty funny and entertaining.
If you have high activity, you're going to need some energy, just like I'm sure TSM did after they finished getting banged out at Worlds by everyone and their fucking dog. So, you know what? Maybe look into vitamin deficiencies in your diet. That's a pretty good angle. But also consider the inputs coming in your system. Where do you get your caffeine sources? What are your stimulants that you take into your environment? Now, GamerSupps gets me going for the day, and I only need one little scoop from it. You know, this is the GamerSupps. I don't know why I'm holding this up. I could fucking put logos all over this screen. I could put a million little cut boxes. I'll cut some upside down if you want. You can't stop me. So if you want high precision, though, you're going to need to focus, right? Just like me, when I zoom in on every little flaw of the Astralis organisation, start excoriating all their bullshit. You don't even know what excoriating means because you haven't got the focus, you haven't got the energy, you haven't got the precision and the activity, the workflow that I have. So I take my GamerSupps, helps me get dialed in, stay zoned in. You know what? There's other things definitely help as well. How about look at your diet, look at your exercise, look how your sleep goes, etc. All the inputs are essential to look at, but as a result, don't just consider the cup of coffee the standard energy drink, as it were. So if you want to play your own game and forget everyone else, like a YamatoCannon inspirational speech at Worlds, then you can try GamerSupps with a 10% discount if you use the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersupps.gg. Now, when YamatoCannon came on, I think it was Summoning Insight. Unfortunately, he's obviously been on all our shows, the Crackdown, etc. So maybe it was the Crackdown as well. I forget which one it was because I couldn't actually find this episode. If anyone can, like, say the name of it in the description box below. Say the name of it in the comments, and I'll put it actually as a link in the description box, and I'll link it here once it's been linked. Basically, he came on one of my shows, and he explained a model that he's been using to consider other teams, both for scouting reasons, and so you understand like how they're using their players, what the balance of roles are, which is this contrast of the activity level and then the precision level. And there's a dynamic that's involved between the two. Like they're connected somehow, but it's almost like there's a ratio element to it. So the more active you are, maybe you don't have to be as precise. If there's very low activity, you're going to be very precise. So basically, he modeled all teams, like professional League of Legends teams, on this aspect of how much activity ratioed against how much precision. The logic being, as I just kind of said, if your activity is high, then maybe your precision doesn't need to be as high. You're getting more chances at it, you're taking more chances, you're playing into variance perhaps. If you're really low activity, then you've got to make sure that your plan is absolutely followed to the letter, otherwise where are your chances to win going to be? Now, if you consider this in the abstract sense, well, you can think of the high activity teams as the ones that skirmish and fight a lot and constantly go for ganks and kills. Now, they're going to have, just logically, a whole bunch of int deaths. They're going to go for a gank that doesn't work off. They're going to take a fight that, like, what's a question, like, was that even 50-50? That might be 40-60, as in 60% to the other team. Like, they're going to have some fights that they throw like that they just go into willy-nilly. They're taking too many of them. Maybe they're not things they've even game plan for. They're just willing to take a fight like IG always was in the moment. Like, yeah, fuck it, we'll fight. So then you got the teams, though, that are looking for their spots. They're trying to play a certain laning phase out with certain, like, thresholds hit as they go. They want to hit certain power spikes and timing windows. And then when they have their moments where they feel like they're in an advantageous situation, their whole notion is when we pull the trigger, we got to do it correctly and we've got to execute it perfectly. That's how we're going to win the game. So if you look at even recent examples of this, I mean, a lot of the LPL teams would be on the high activity, but this is where traditionally they were actually underestimated. Also fairly high precision, actually. Not the highest. It's just not going to happen if you use high activity, but pretty high up there. Like, for me, even though they were usually probably at a medium precision, and even then it was because they had outrageously skilled players, particularly the Shy and Rookie. To me, IG's a great example of this. They liked the high activity style. They were clearly a team that was more in that vein, and they were willing to fight you all the time, go for ganks all the time. Like, I've never personally thought Ning was a genius jungler. I know why he got to win the MVP at Worlds in Season 8, but I personally thought that should have gone to the Shy or Rookie. I think probably the Shy with how he played that tournament. Like, to me, I don't think Ning is a genius who's reading the game. I think he's just in the flow of fighting continuously, and he has the pieces in his army of Ning, the Shy, Jackie. He has the pieces to take these 24/7 skirmishes and just keep fighting and just keep trying to turn fights that are going against them. In that regard, I actually consider Ning to be like the spiritual successor to MLXG, because that was basically what this guy did. Like, the joke is he never met a fight he didn't like. Now, if you followed up, though, you can see the power of that. We all know that 5 players following up is way better than two of them having one idea, one having one idea in the middle, the other two disagreeing. Hence why those Fnatic comms were a joke this year. And I know that Mithy was also doing great work this year as a coach to bring those disparate elements together. Now, what's funny is it's not like all Chinese and LPL teams played that way. Like traditionally, if you go back and look at a lot of Claylove's teams, whether that's World Elite in the early days, EDG after that with Nami, and then with Deft, these teams, because of Claylove himself having a penchant to not necessarily gank as much, and instead being a guy who liked to farm up, liked to just help a lane, but as in help it, not necessarily snowball it. Like, these were teams that wanted to go to the late game team fights, that wanted to use objectives to defeat you late in the game. So they were much more on the lower activity and hopefully high precision. And that's why there were many, many championship teams on some of the greatest teams of all time. You pick your spots, you team fight late, and you help the lanes. That's it. You get through that portion of the game. Now, LCK teams, in contrast to LPL, traditionally have been much more of the classic prototypical example of the lower activity, higher precision approach. Like this year, I think it's a little bit different because the teams that ended up going to Worlds, it was like this. Damron could hybrid, but they certainly opted into some of the scaling comps themselves at times. Genji were more the traditional style. I thought they very much played like a traditional Korean team, which is why I think they got beaten by G2, quite frankly. And for me, DRX were the outliers because they're essentially trying, this is CV Max's unique approach, to be iconoclasts against that whole approach. And you're not going to have seen that if you watch the quarterfinals at Worlds, because that was such a match within a match mind game that they'd played that team so many times and lost to them, that wasn't how DRX usually played. If you go back to the early part of summer and watch them, they're trying to snowball games early, crazy comps and picks that no one can anticipate for and that look bad, but they potentially get working in the game. There's a reason they were top of the league most of the time in LCK. Like, they were trying to be like an LPL team in the LCK, and it was working for quite a lot of the time. Now, the interesting thing, and part of the reason why I think this from Yamato was such a great concept to bring up, is because so much of the influence on Western thinking has not just been that Koreans were the successful teams, therefore we've copied and aped their playing styles, but more importantly, that people like Monty and obviously in the modern day LS are much more in favour of that lower activity but high precision style. Like, they see the beauty in it, they see the mastery that it takes to actually execute that style. And that was obviously how Koreans dominated from Season 4 through to Season 7. But I always think that both those characters did underestimate some of the LPL teams in this regard. Like, they would just see the mistakes that those teams made and not consider it in this view of like activity, precision. They would just see the mistakes and be like, act as though you can just scale up the exact same from activity and that your percentage of precision should stay the same. Whereas actually precision is what's going to drop off because you're increasing the activity. So I would contrast this, if you want to look at a sports example, with the 2005 to 2007 Phoenix Suns, which was the 7 seconds or less Mike D'Antoni offense, run by Steve Nash, obviously, where the whole premise was, as soon as they got a possession, they pushed it up the floor and they went for a shot really quickly. Now, one of the reasons why this was quite kind of genius, it was one of the first like true small ball approaches before the really good Warriors came along years later, is that it didn't matter that they didn't have all the best three-point shooters because they were getting so many shots up and then pushing it back that they were getting way more possessions potentially. And so, especially if they're playing against a team that on the other side goes half court and grinds down the clock. So as a result, they can afford to miss a bunch of their shots because they're creating more shots, which means when they make them, they might be making them at the same clip you do, but then getting even more shots. So, like, that's a great way to potentially win the game. Obviously, the difference is also puts a lot of stress on your defense, doesn't it? Now, the high precision version of that, which amazingly did happen, it's why they're a unicorn in NBA history, is the Golden State Warriors with Klay Thompson, with Steph Curry, especially when they had Kevin Durant, because then they could take loads of shots and play up tempo. But they also had 3 god-tier three-point shooters and a couple of people who were fucking around on the bench and the rest of the lineup that could shoot them. So that was why that team was just OP as fuck and why a lot of people felt it was unfair when they won the championships. The point here is, though, you can't just look at this these teams, unless you use a model like this, and fully appreciate what they're doing, because you're just going to think they're just playing it wrong. Just play the other style, play the Korean style. I mean, one of the reasons I can see why Yamato came to this is this obviously is something that his own Vitality team did, particularly if you go look at Season 8, Season 9. Like, this was a team where they were clearly higher activity, which meant that it wasn't as much of a deal that the precision wasn't amazing. Like, they were just going to get shit going early. Any advantages they got early were going to be transferred to Jizuke. And at that point in time, it's side lane kingdom, mate, and you better have an answer. Otherwise, this game is going to be over in 30 minutes, 25 minutes. So you're not even going to get to your late game. You're not going to get to activate your comp. It doesn't matter what your lanes were at that point in time. They used to use the jungler for that. Mowgli just followed whatever they wanted and did like a Korean version of Gilius. And then Kabashard that's super stable in top lane, and then the bot lane does what the bot lane does. They play aggressive in their own fucked up way. So the thing is, if you look at his team in that sense, you can see how one of the things they were able to do was, with high activity, put a lot of pressure on the opponent. Make many, many other teams have to find answers in the game for what they're doing, not stuff that they necessarily game plan for outside of it, or looking at the comps and how they should play out in a traditional metagame state. And as a result, that gave them not only a lot of wins over the mid and lower table teams who just didn't have an answer for them, but more importantly, even gave them upset chances against the top teams at times. Now, the funny thing is, the same season, you had the opposite contrast. You had the Splice team of Vizicachi and Cersei and those guys. So in this team, this was a team where they clearly were low activity. They just couldn't get anything done properly in the mid game. And then later on in the game, it would be messy, but tell you what, their precision in terms of winning those team fights, they would win so many of them. And as a result, you would just be like, how are they getting away with this? Because they were on the other extreme of the equation as opposed to Vitalik. Neither of these teams were balanced, in my opinion. But these playing styles, I actually think, gave them way better chances to win based on the personnel that they had and how the opponent would react to that. Like, if you want to use a boxing or an MMA example, this is why if you're a volume puncher, it's maybe not as big a deal if you're hitting them super hard, if you're really cracking them. Like, in that scenario, the precision isn't even as much of a deal. They have to deal with the volume that you're throwing at them, and some of them are getting through even small ones and just touching them, tapping them, getting them going, making them react, feint, everything. That's one of the reasons why the Diaz brothers had such effective boxing in MMA. They weren't really knocking many people out. Whereas you contrast that with like Dan Henderson in MMA, his whole style was he's waiting, he's walking like fucking Frankenstein towards it, and he's just loading up that big right hand, and he's trying to get that one right hand just perfectly executed on your chest. And if he does that, if he gets it under your chin, you're going out. And that's his way to win. That's his win condition. And it worked against many, many players in the same way as the Splice style just worked. I mean, there was even a point that Dopa made. I'll probably do a whole video on some of his insights. I thought they were brilliant. One of the points he made was he models, like, in the game, the concept of like players and teams having an attention span. And if you make that 0 to 100, you can do a bunch of things with different positions and activity that can make them have to use up a lot of that 100% bar of attention, and therefore make it harder for them to make their own choices. Like, basically the premise was you can short circuit people's decision making by overwhelming them, and as a result they will make more mistakes than they would in isolation with a lower amount of attention needed, where they could really think about it and focus and consider what their game plan is and the correct move to do. This is why, for me, there's a genius to the way Monty and LS think, but it's more suited to games like chess, like turn-based games where you have time to think, that you can actually plan out what the responses will be, and they nearly always will be in that way. Like, the problem here is a lot of players in a game that's real time like this, especially because they're so young and inexperienced, they're just going to fail that meta game theory angle, and they're not going to be able to compute the game that way. It's one of the reasons why when players can and teams can, I love to watch it. I've always loved watching the Mithy and Perks teams, even the ones they weren't in together, for that very reason. They just get it. They know how to win, as I pointed out in my video. It's the reason why I've always loved the game of Soaz. Like, this guy's mind for when he's going to win in the game and how to win at the game at all times was always so unique compared to other people who were just trying to smash the lane, or, oh, I'm a tank and I just joined the fight. And people like, no, this guy understood the game on a different level. And as a result, he had this theory of mind that some of the other players didn't really. They didn't seem to fully appreciate what the opponent was doing in that sense. So one of the things I like about this is it's not a perfect, it's not a law of the universe. It's just a theory. And basically, think of it as a model or a lens that you can use. It's a different way to view the game and to view teams and contrast them, especially in terms of scouting reports. I think it could be great for desks. Like, I would consider this as like that particle and wave experiment of the dual slits. It's like, if you do it one way, you're going to find that light is a particle, travels as a particle. If you do it another way, oh my God, no, it's actually a wave. It's like, it can be both. Depends on what the instrument you're using are and what metrics of measurement you're using. That's all actually that those things show, is what the instrument measures. It doesn't actually tell you an objective fact about that thing necessarily. So one of the reasons why I actually always have said I thought YamatoCannon was misunderstood as a coach, because a lot of the like nerd draft guys would be like, oh, I didn't know anything about it. It just sounds good and looks good. He's just talking like it. No, he's approaching the game differently, like a young buck. He's trying to manipulate the psychology of his players. He's trying to put them into a frame of mind where they understand how they could win the game, even if they might not necessarily have a superior draft or superior champion. Like, this is the way we're going to do it. Here's psychologically how we're going to believe that we can win, and our own approach. And here's our in-group, and there's the out-group, and we're going to reinforce the strength that we have within in that sense, and inspirational. There's a reason why that can work. It's not the only approach. It is an approach. In fact, that's what's funny. The people I like in League of Legends, the ones who have their own approach, like Yamato, LS, S, Monty, hell, even Weldon, I'll throw him in the mix. Like, these are people who are constructing or have constructed their own methodology for League of Legends. If you're interested in the topic of epistemology, they're people who, it's not even just about how you think about the game. It's like, what can we think about the game? What can be known? In what ways can we build up concepts and what metrics do exist? Like, I did a recent interview on my side channel with Robin Black, an MMA analyst, where it's basically all about this. It's about questioning the presumptions that we have, the preconceptions about what the game is, how it works. And you have to be able to go back and do these things if you want to find new ways to look at the game. But essentially, the ideal way to do it, in my opinion, is you break the game down. You'd use the solvate coagula alchemical formula. You break the game down to its smallest parts and you build it up from first principles in a way that makes sense to you, a framework that you can fuck with, you can understand and therefore apply to the rest of the world. You don't just use someone else's when you don't understand their process or how they arrived at those conclusions. So if we take this model and we contrast it with a few teams in history, now I'm not going to do a perfect job with this. I actually hope someone else can take up the baton and maybe do a great piece about this. I would say like G2 of Season 9, they're a pretty high activity team, but they had like at least a medium bordering on high precision level at times. Now, when they had a bad game, they would throw the game as a result. They did that a few times this year, like when they threw at the inhibitor against Fnatic, but that's because they're going for that high activity style. Believe me, it's really hard to respond to the way that some of those teams were pushing in the lanes and constantly fighting you and willing to dive you in scenarios where otherwise you should in theory be safe. I would say TSM, by they got to Worlds, was a low activity team and a low precision team. That's why they weren't willing to jump into that 9-man sleep where, we couldn't see if they were in there. They just weren't willing to pull the trigger on anything. They wanted the other team to int into them like they did in the LCS playoffs. I think as an individual player, this is why Hillestad sometimes was a contrast against Nemesis and Reckless. Like, this is a high activity player who doesn't have to worry about the precision because he's going to get so many more chances in the game and he's going to force so many more chances that he can afford to do a couple of mistakes. He might win you the whole game on the next instance. I think Samsung Blue in Season 4 was more of a low activity, high precision style. When they got into their game, he couldn't do anything against them. And they were just going to gradually get stronger and stronger and stronger. They were just going to choke you out in all those team fights. There was nothing he could do at that point in the game. OMG of Season 3 onwards, for me, one of my favourite high activity teams, a team that loved to do the tower dives, loved to just go for crazy players early. Their jungler loved to duel the other jungler. Amazing style to watch when it works. It doesn't have to be high precision. These are just men's men, like just fucking beasts going in there. And as a result, I always felt like I wished they'd been the team in the Season 3 finals. You saw in Season 4 what they were capable of at Worlds. The first non-Korean team to beat a Korean team in a Worlds best of 5. Actually, technically, I guess TPA did that. Yeah, whatever. Another one then. How about that? A Chinese one. Ooh. Unicorns of Love in Season 5. The reason why I don't think they were very good is they were high activity, but they were low, although slightly underrated precision. Like, they could clearly get some of that shit to work, even though it shouldn't on paper, which I actually think is an early example of this premise at play. But I don't think that their activity actually justified them being a good team in that regard. I think it just gave them a chance to win and upset people. Fnatic in Season 5, in contrast, I think it was more like a medium activity, fairly high precision, actually. I think YellowStar had a really good read on the game there. I think Rainova understood what to do with Huni and the rest of the lanes. Like, that was why they had good control. It was already basically God-tier SKT of the same season that could truly thrash them. Like, I think that team might be the best ever for having, like, low activity to maybe approaching medium, but super high precision. That's why they were so perfectly clutch. That's why when they had their composite worlds, there's nothing you could do against them. That's why they would just grind you out, and you didn't even feel like you ever had a chance in the game. Even if you got ahead, you knew it was inevitable they were coming back. If you want to go for high both, probably SKT of Season 3, like, they would go with the pick comps. They would go with crazy aggressive players from Faker. They would go with ganks all day long if they needed to. And they knew that they could pull it off. And, like, that revenge game against OMG where they push all those inhibs and all it, like, that's just one of the craziest sequences you'll ever see in the history of League of Legends. So I think this is a really interesting model, and I hope more people take it up or consider it as food for thought of a way to look at some of their favourite teams or the teams they want to criticise. This video was kindly supported by Pronogo, Mohammed, Alabdul, Razzaq, Dean Tanglis, James Pederson, VatriSam, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Zoomba Gaming, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, and Alexander Rao. Special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for one of my upcoming episodes? Maybe you want to ask more of those questions in that video AMA I do each month. Do you want teasers? Find out who the next guests are for my shows. Well, maybe you even want to take part in one of those crazy donated discussions where we go all over the place. If any of these perks appeal to you, or you want to support the channel, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.